Hey everyone, Andrew here. So, when I decided to start editing videos again and working on this, my first thought was to finally edit and finish and post the video that I recorded before COVID hit that I intended to release March of last year. And I loaded it up and started trying to edit it, and it was completely unusable. It basically, the audio was all screwed up, and it wouldn't let me actually edit it without cutting out like giant chunks of everything. So now I have to do it from scratch. And after spending hours doing that, I don't want to touch that thing with a 10-foot pole right now. So instead, I'm going to do one of the other ideas I had during COVID that I thought was something to talk about and something interesting, because I watched two TV shows that are based off a very famous literary figure, and that is King Arthur. And I wanted to talk about the two shows and compare them and see what they did right, what they did wrong, the things that I liked, things I didn't, And the two shows that I'm going to talk about today are Showtime's Camelot and the BBC's Merlin. Now, I'm going to start by talking about the plot, the basic idea of the story structure of what the series is going for. Then I'm going to talk about each of the big main characters and how they compare to each other. And the end is going to be a crapshoot of, things that I liked about different parts, my personal thoughts on both series overall, what worked, what didn't work for me, things like that. There are going to be a few caveats that I have to put out from the start. For starters, Camelot is a one-season show, and Merlin is a 5-season show. So there's already going to be a disadvantage towards Camelot because it is so short. That said, Merlin had a much smaller budget than Camelot did. So Camelot has better effects to a certain extent, but definitely has better action sequences because it was trying to be Game of Thrones. So let's start out with the plot of the two and get into going to that. So I'm going to start out with Camelot. So Camelot, it starts with Morgana Pendragon returning home after being sent to a nunnery by her father many years ago after he remarried. She returns to the kingdom wanting him to apologize for the things that he did to her and to give up the kingdom and give it to her. Uther Pendragon says no, so she uses magic to transform herself and poisons him. Immediately after the murder, Merlin shows up, goes to Uther's wife, the queen, and is like, there is someone who can challenge Morgana for the throne. Do you remember that deal that we made many years ago? Basically, and that I saved your life. In return, you gave me your son. And she thought he'd used it for a spell or something like that, but he had actually hidden it with this poor family, and that is the kid who turns out to be Arthur. So Arthur has been raised by a poor family. He has really no direction. He's just a poor farmer at this point, but he is a tremendous flirt and will hit on anything with two legs and boobs. And it's like, even if that person is married or dating his best friend or whatever. Merlin shows up, tells him who he really is. They proceed to travel to Camelot to present it. Morgana arrives and it's like, he's not the true king, he's nothing. I am the firstborn, I am the true ruler of this area. Gathers a force to go and face off against Arthur. Arthur and Merlin decide that they have to go and find the special sword and pull the sword of Mercury and pull it from the stone, which means that he is the true king of England. And it isn't in a stone, it is in a mountain on the side next to a waterfall. But Arthur uses his smarts and thinking to rig up a pulley system so that they get up there easily, manages to pull out the sword, and all of England unites behind him, and Morgana is forced to retreat and take over a smaller base. The series then becomes Morgana trying to come up with ways to get the people against Arthur to rally people behind her so she can gain what she believes is truly hers, which is the throne. During this, Arthur has met the woman of his dreams, Guinevere, and he and her meet and get along, and they end up sleeping together. And then he finds out that Guinevere is engaged to one of his knights. In fact, his most loyal knight, a gentleman named Leontes. Arthur tries to convince Guinevere to leave Leontes and marry him. Guinevere doesn't, so she then marries Leontes, but he eventually does find out and things fall apart. During all this, Morgana has been plotting to find a way to overthrow. Arthur has gotten forces from the other side of England to rally behind her to create a fake attack to keep Arthur and his knights busy while she attacks the main castle and takes over. Arthur and Merlin get wind of this. They manage to overcome it. And the series kind of ends where it starts, where it's like, all right, well, Arthur's in charge. Morgana is now off on the side, still trying to figure out how to get revenge and get her kingdom back. And that's how the series ends, because it was clearly meant to be more than one season long. So like I said, this is a really short season for this show. It's only 10. It's only 10 episodes long. And it doesn't do a lot. It feels like a prequel. It feels like just the preamble of the stuff that we didn't get. They do make some interesting choices, interesting things about it. And I will get more into that in the characters and the special thoughts on the series. On to Merlin. So, the BBC's Merlin starts with Merlin, of course, traveling to the kingdom of Camelot. And he's there to be trained and to live with the court physician Gaius. And we discover really quickly that Merlin has magic and he can control it without having to say words. And that makes him extremely powerful because there's never been many wizards that can cast without having to at least utter a spell. But it is very dangerous in here because this is Camelot, which at this time is being ruled by Uther Pendragon, who has banished and made magic of any form illegal for the last 20 years. And basically, the second anyone has even hinted at having magic or doing anything with magic or is remotely involved with magic, Uther has them immediately executed. So, yeah. So they have to keep this a secret from everyone around them. Merlin ends up meeting Arthur, who is actually raised by Uther in this version. And he is an arrogant bully, and basically the first thing we see him doing is making one of the servants hold up a target while he throws axes at the target. Merlin does not like this. He gets in a confrontation and doesn't manage to beat Arthur, but manages to put up a good fight with the assistance of his magic without it being obvious that he was using that. Merlin then discovers that there is a dragon imprisoned under the castle. He's the last of the dragons. And he goes and visits the dragon, and the dragon tells him that he has an important destiny, that he's destined to be the greatest wizard of all time, and that he has to protect Arthur, because they are two sides of the same coin, and together with them, magic will return to Camelot and unite all of the kingdoms. And Merlin is like, I don't want anything to do with this, but he has to. It is his destiny. And someone attempts to take the life of Arthur, but Merlin jumps in and saves him, and Uther sees this and decides to reward Merlin by making him Arthur's personal servant. Then the series quickly becomes a Monster of the Week series. Basically, every episode is a new, this creature has come in and they're going to cause trouble, or this person has using magic for a good thing, but that will get them killed and we have to protect them. Very formulaic, very little repetitive after a little while. It's a lot of just, it's like we have a new problem this week, we have to solve the problem, we have to keep the plot going. And it's just basically you see Merlin trying to keep his secret, trying to help other magics and trying to stop evil magic, but also trying to convince Arthur to be a better person and to do the right thing, all the while making sure that Arthur doesn't know who he really is. And that leads to a lot of good comedic moments and different things of him having to take a potion that makes him look like an old man so he can trick Arthur at points. And basically you get through this is literally like the first 4 seasons. It's just like dealing with Uther and dealing with Arthur and every creature of the week. And only in the last season do we get into the real King Arthur myth and running the kingdom and things of that nature. But you see hints of it throughout. And I'm trying not to spoil too much, but I will probably say that the story ends the similar way that the books end. So if you know how the books end, you've got a good idea of how this might end. Let's move on to the cast and the characters and compare the two. So let's start off with our two kings. So we have Arthur from Camelot, who is a country bumpkin to a certain extent. Basically, he's a poor farmer kid who isn't super educated, doesn't really know how to fight too much, but he has a good heart and he believes in justice and doing the right thing, and that laws are important and we need to be ruled by a government and follow the rules and follow the laws and trying to make things equal and balanced instead of a dictatorship. He is also, however, a horrible flirt and will hit on anything and everything that moves. And he's basically the light against the darkness type of character, but in a childlike form where it's like, oh, you say these things, but I don't know if you can live up to it. Then you get Merlin's Arthur. And he's a little different because of the way he was raised and the way he's introduced and the way he is. You got this character who has been taught his entire life that magic is bad and how to be ruled, and he's basically been being taught and led by an evil person, someone who is very screwed up and very corrupted, and someone who will murder people at the drop of a hat just if someone utters the word magic anywhere in the vicinity. But you see this character who also has a very good heart and a very wants to do the right thing and wants to do what's best for everybody and wants to be, he wants to make his dad proud, but he wants to be a good king and a good ruler and do the right thing. And it's an interesting balance of the two. It's also really interesting to see how he changes as the series goes, because when you first introduced to him, he is a complete and utter prick and you hate him. But you see the good in him, you see how he cares about people and how he listens to people and how even someone that he doesn't like at the beginning, like he couldn't stand Merlin at the beginning, Merlin becomes his most trusted friend and advisor by the end. And even if he doesn't necessarily do what Merlin says, he takes it into account and thinks about it. And it's really interesting and it adds a lot to his character because you see him do things that his father would never do and that he understands perfect. Like when he does eventually become the king, he makes commoners into knights, which his father was 100% against. And it's even more interesting when you look at Guinevere and what this Arthur does with Guinevere, and I'll talk about that when I get to her. It's kind of interesting to compare these two Arthurs because, well, basically because you have the Camelot Arthur, who is the, like, what you get from the books, which is the perfect kind of leader character who knows what the right thing is to do and tries to do the right thing, but also will hit on anything that moves, which leads to the destruction of his own kingdom. Whereas you get Merlin's Arthur, who is nothing like he is at the beginning, like he is in the books. He is not a peasant. He has not been raised to think this way, but because of his own kindness and the influence of his friends and the influence of the people around him, he becomes this kind-hearted person who not only, falls in love with a servant girl, but makes servant people knights when they were never allowed to be. He's more understanding. The only thing that he is 100% against, that is his father's negative influence, is magic. And even that, in time, comes to understand to a certain extent. Yeah, let's move on to Lady Guinevere. So, in Camelot, Guinevere is depicted as being, someone's strong will and strong this, that, and the other, and she meets Arthur and immediately sleeps with him. Like, it does not take him much to get into her pants. And she's engaged at that point to someone. And while she still chooses to be married to that person, she also continues to talk to Arthur and flirt with Arthur and have this thing. I have a really hard time not referring to her as a kind of slutty character. And especially when you get towards the end of the series, because her husband, when he finds out, is basically planning to leave her and leave her destitute and, cast her out into the wild as a whore. But he hesitates and doesn't do it right away. He and Arthur go out to battle and fight off an enemy force, and he ends up dying to save Arthur. And then immediately after her husband's death, Guinevere is already shacking up with Arthur again. Like, literally, maybe a day or two later. It does not take much time. And it's like, wow, that is horrible. Well, on one side, it makes perfect sense that she would totally cheat on Arthur for Lancelot, because she did it with Arthur. Like, currently she doesn't have a problem cheating on her fiancés or husbands. And I honestly, this is the worst part of the Camelot show for me, is just the way they depict this character and how unlikable they kind of make her by having her be this slightly more slutty and slightly more flippant character. And just, And then we compare this Guinevere to Merlin's Guinevere. And in Merlin, this Guinevere is, well, for one, she's a woman of color. Two, she is a servant in this version. She is not a princess or royal. She is the handmaiden to Morgan Pendragon. But you see her interacting with Arthur and Merlin, and how she brings out the best parts in Arthur, and she helps him think about what he's doing and what's the right thing to do, and creates this level of, kindness and generosity that he did not have before her. And it's actually a really good look into this character, and adds a lot of depth to her and a lot of things that make her interesting. She also is, is a servant girl, so her becoming queen is a bigger deal, especially with Uther Pendragon being, the person that taught Arthur, and it's like, you only marry a royal. Marriage is about land and gaining power. It is not about love. And him choosing to marry someone entirely out of love says a lot more about this character. And I also like Gwyn is just a good character in this. She's strong, she's determined. Like, there are points where she knows that her being around Arthur will get him in trouble, and so she leaves. And only returns after, being captured by Morgan Pendragon and being tortured and this, that, and the other. But she's a very strong, determined character that does what she needs to do. So, yeah, the fact that this Guinevere is the commoner and that Arthur is the prince in this actually adds a lot more interesting dynamic to this than Camelot's, where they're both, well, he's a commoner and she's just slightly above that. She's a duchess-like character. But, yeah, I really liked the Guinevere character in Merlin. Speaking of Merlin, let's talk about the Merlins. So, in Camelot, we have Merlin, played by the great Joseph Fiennes, and he has this really good stoic Merlin that he does, but he also adds a little bit of darkness to this character. It's like magic for him is not a gift, it is a drug. And at this point in the series, he's doing everything in his power to not use magic. Because if he uses it, he gives it power and gives it control. And he cannot control himself because he is an addict to this power. And I will tell you a story in the later part that will explain to me why his power is dangerous and what makes him a scary type figure. But he's also a lot more on the sidelines in this. He spends a lot of time being weakened or captured or off doing his own thing. And then you have Merlin from BBC's Merlin, who is the main character of the show. And he's very young. He's being played by Colin Morgan. He gives it a lot of good thing to it. Basically, he's very smart, but he has this desire to do magic and to do what he needs to do and what he wants to do. But he also knows how to hide it. He has to do a lot of manipulating, a lot of thinking things through. This whole series has a lot of secret identity thing, where it's like, we cannot let anyone know that Merlin has power. If anyone finds out, Merlin is dead. So he refuses to tell anybody anything until the very, 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 very end of the series. Like, last half hour at most of the series. And, like, only Gaius, the court physician who's training him, is the only one who knows he has magic. And it's a lot of just trying to keep that hidden. But it's also, like, he's very kind-hearted and wants to help people and wants to do the right thing, even though sometimes the right thing is not the thing he actually does. But he usually tries to do the best that he can, and it's got a really good heart to it. And it's interesting to see the things that he has to do to keep himself hidden and keep himself that. And I will say right now that ruined the secret identity thing for me for a lot of shows, because it was so much of this show. It was pretty much the entirety of this show is just no one can know who I am, and he will go to extreme lengths to hide it. When it's just like, you're lying to Gwyn. You could just tell Gwyn. She's the nicest freaking person you know. She will not do anything. She will never rat you out. So just tell her and she'll help you. You won't have to do this BS. It makes perfect sense why he was hiding it when Uther is in charge. And I can even understand him being hesitant to tell Arthur because Arthur has the same problems. But the fact that he never tells a single other soul besides Gaius, who's the one training him to be a physician, and has also given him books on magic and letting him learn magic, it's just annoying. It gets really frustrating after a while. Where you're like, just tell them. So yeah, it's been really hard to watch like superhero shows after this because right now I hate secret identities and the extent of keeping secret identities from people who should know who you are, if for no other reason than to protect themselves. But yeah, that was a bit much for me. Let us move on to Morgan Pendragon, or Morgan Le Fay. And Camelot, she is played by Eva Green, who has this dark, smoldering, dangerous power to her. And being Eva Green, she, of course, ends up naked at certain part of this series multiple times because it's Eva Green. She gets naked in almost everything she's in. And it's not necessary, but, it's appreciated. I sound like a pervert when I say that, but But she plays the character very what you expect. She's like evil from the get-go. Like the first thing she does is demand an apology and a power. And all she wants is power, and she will do almost anything to get that power. Who she is and why she uses what power she has. She uses her sexuality to manipulate people, but she also uses magic, but she also has this appearance and attitude of I can murder you at any moment type of personality. And it works really well in this show. She's almost a little one-dimensional. Almost. She has a little bit of depth to her. You see that for her using magic actually is dangerous and hurts, and is not necessarily something she can control fully. But yeah, she's very much I want power and I want what is owed to me. I am the firstborn. I should be the queen of all of the land. And then you have Merlin's Morgan Pendragon, aka Morgan Le Fay. So Morgan Pendragon is played by Katie McGrath, who I know her from playing Lana Luthor on Supergirl. And it's pretty much a similar performance, although I would say it's a better performance in Supergirl because she doesn't ever have to go full evil. Whereas with Morgan in this one, she starts out very positive. She is Uther's ward. She's raised alongside Arthur. She is a good person who wants to do the right things and finds out slowly that she has magic and comes to the realization that she can't tell anyone because her uncle wants to, destroy anything with magic. And she hates the fact that he will kill her own kind just for having magic, and finds out eventually that she is actually not just his ward, she is his child. And this kind of pushes her a little over the edge. So she runs away to join druids to learn magic and be, a full magic user. And when she comes back, she is full on psychotic evil. Like, just, I want power. I want to make everyone suffer. I want the kingdom. The kingdom is mine. I deserve it. And it's such a dramatic change from who she is in the first season and a half. And it's like, it's a thing of like, it's justifiable to a point where it's like, okay, you don't want Uther in charge because he's been murdering your own kind. Yes. What if Arthur agrees to not kill magic people anymore? And she's like, no, I want power at that point. So, yeah. It's a decent performance. It's not a great performance. She, like I said, she falls apart very quickly and becomes even more and more obsessed and vindictive and just, I want Arthur and everyone to suffer. And that's the only real characters that cross over. So, in the general news, like, the things that work for these shows are a little different, but a little interesting for both. Like, Merlin, the thing that works really well for it is Uther Pendragon, who is played by Anthony Head, aka Giles from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And while this is a performance that I've seen him kind of give before, because this is his kind of typical bad guy performance, it's the same thing that he did in Dominion. It's the same thing he did in Repo the Genetic Opera. It's kind of that same level of maniacal evil who's like, I have one thing about me that's good, and then the rest of me is just pure psychotic evil. But it's freaking Giles. I'm 100% behind this performance. It's really good. He's really interesting. He's like, I think he overstays his welcome a little too long. But he's a great character who adds a lot of depth, and it actually makes the characters around him more interesting of how they have to look at him and how they have to deal with him and think about him. Like, seeing Uther raise Arthur and how Arthur's goodness overcomes all of the dark seediness of Uther is impressive and really interesting. It's also like you get to cover some of the same myths between these two stories, and the one that's like stands out the most, especially with the Camelot version, is Excalibur and the Lady of the Lake. So in Camelot, I already talked about them pulling a sword from the stone, but that was the sword of Mercury. It was not Excalibur, and it was rusted as hell and was actually not remotely useful other than to rally the people behind him. Merlin decides, it's like, we can't have you fighting with a rusted sword, so I'm going to go and I'm going to get you a better sword. He goes to the greatest swordsmith in the land and wants him to make the strongest sword ever made, and the swordsmith agrees and gets, with the help of his daughter, helps make the sword. And when Merlin goes to get the sword, the swordsmith is like, I will give this sword to the king and no one else. No one else will lay hands on this sword. And Merlin does not like that. And he's been using his power a little bit. So he's starting to get a little bit of his dark magic going. And he ends up using his power and kills the swordsmith. The daughter sees this. She grabs the sword and she runs. Merlin chases her out into a lake. She's in a boat. She falls off the boat into the water, and Merlin accidentally freezes the entire lake. So she's drowning, and she takes the sword and shoves it up, and Merlin grabs the sword, and she slips and falls under the ice. And then Merlin, when he returns to Arthur and presents the sword, they're like, oh, what is the sword's name, and where did it come from? And Merlin says the sword's name is Excalibur, which was the name of the swordsmith's daughter. And he tells Arthur the story of the Lady in the Lake, how she presented it to him, and that's where that myth came from. And just looking at that on its own, it's like, geez Louise, that's dark. That Merlin just murdered two people because he didn't want to take the swordsmith to Arthur to present the sword. It's like, you murdered two people because you lost control of your magic and went crazy. And yeah, it's a lot. In comparison to the BBC Merlin, where there was a tournament going on, and one of the people fighting in the tournament was a super magic-powered being that was undead. and the only thing that can kill a being of that nature is a sword doused in dragon's fire. So Merlin takes the strongest sword the blacksmith has, goes down to the dragon, and asks him to douse it in the fire so that it can stop, so that Arthur can receive it and use it to destroy the devil and become the king that he's meant to be. The dragon agrees to do this with one rule, that no one is allowed to wield that sword besides Arthur. That sword would be too powerful in the hands of anyone else and would be corrupted. So Merlin agrees. He takes the sword up to Arthur. Arthur's getting ready to go fight the thing. Uther comes in, knocks his son unconscious, takes the sword, and goes out and fights the undead thing. He manages to win, and then you start to already see him starting to be like corrupted by the power of the sword. He's like, yes, I feel like I'm in my 20s again, type of thing. And Merlin notices this. He sneaks in the night, steals the sword, and he throws it into a lake. The lady in the lake is actually a woman that Merlin fell in love with. And she possessed magic, and Uther was going to kill her. And basically, in trying to escape, she ended up dying and merging herself with the lake and becoming a water spirit. Years after the tournament, the Morgana has started summoning an army of undead powerful beings to try to take over the kingdom. And Merlin knows he has to get the sword back. So he requests it, and the lady of the lake, who was the woman he loved, reaches her hand out and hands him the sword. And he wields it and uses it to help fight off the undead forces. And when it's done, he travels into the woods, stabs the sword into a stone, and seals the sword into that stone that no one can pull it out. Another few years later, and Morgana has gained complete control of the castle, and Arthur and Merlin are on the run. Arthur is, distraught at losing the kingdom and losing everything, and he doesn't believe he can keep going. So Merlin takes him into the woods and shows him the sword. And he tells him a story that he is making up on the spot of how this sword was blessed by the Lady of the Lake and is meant for the one and true King of England, that only the worthy person can pull out the sword. And Arthur's like, all right, I will try if you shut up. So Arthur goes to pull the sword out, and it does not move, and Merlin utters the spell and releases the sword, and Arthur pulls it out and uses it and manages to win and fight and take over the kingdom and regain his kingdom back from Morgana. Now, those are two completely different ideas of how Excalibur came to be and what it means and all that. Excalibur in Camelot is a regular sword, just done like an expertly made sword, but it's just a regular sword that has a really dark history to it. In fact, I would say that sword's probably cursed at that point. And then you got Merlin, where it's regular sword enhanced with magic and is made to be so powerful that only someone of true goodness can actually wield it without being corrupted. It's kind of interesting in its own way. Comparing the two, like if you were comparing the two series as action-wise, like Camelot has the better fight scenes. It has the budget, it's trying to be Game of Thrones, so it's got some good war scenes, some good fighting. The combat feels weighty and has stuff to it. That said, the Merlin scenes are a little bit different. Like, you get some decent fights out of it, especially, like, they have some really good one-on-one tournament fights. A lot of the fighting is, 2 or 3 of them fighting against a magical creature, but then it's also, because it's such a low budget, you don't get some of the bigger stuff, the bigger fights. A lot of the time, it'll be, like, a group of 10 regular people fighting an army of 1,000 CGI creatures or something, and you just see like pieces of that fight. You don't see all of it in BBC, but it doesn't really detract from it. It's not something that I was like noticing all the time, like, oh, these aren't good fight scenes. Like, no, the fight scenes are fine. They just don't expect a Game of Thrones high budget thing. Expect, Legend of the Seeker quality. And it's the that's one of those things that's like there's a lot of magic in Merlin. There is almost no magic in Camelot. Between Morgana and Merlin in Camelot, they do maybe 4 spells total, and like the most impressive one is freezing the lake, and that's it. Whereas there's a bunch of magical creatures in Merlin. You get to see a lot of different types of magic, different uses of it. Some really interesting, well done CGI creations, and then some absolutely terrible one. They do this one character at the start of season 5, which is clearly an alien. It's clearly an alien design, especially with a black person face on it, and it is horrible. It's the worst effect in that. If you can stomach looking at it, you're going to be fine, because the rest of them are pretty good and pretty interesting. I liked the characters and the way they're done in both series. I think they both have their strengths and their disadvantages. I think Camelot, most of the cast is fine. I don't think there's too many standouts besides Merlin is pretty good, and Morgan and Eva Green as Morgan Le Fay are pretty good. But then you have, on the other end of that spectrum, Guinevere pulling the whole thing kind of down with her wanton lustfulness. It's just... And then you go to Merlin, and Merlin has an exceptional cast. I would say it's like there's not a bad performer in all of it. Like, everyone does a decent performance. The standout would definitely be, Anthony Head as Uther Pendragon, but then you also have, Arthur's really good, Merlin's really good, Guinevere's amazing. There's a bunch of little side characters that are great. I think the only one that I can say drags it down even a little bit would have to be Morgana Pendragon. And that's not even her fault or even that bad. It's just because she starts off as such a good person, and then the drop into pure evil is so hard and so sudden that it literally happens off camera. The fact that they tried to make her the main villain for the last 3 seasons hurt the series, I think. A little bit. Not enough that I'm going to be like, this is a bad series or something. It's such a dramatic drop. It's like, I don't even like believing those are the same characters. I'm more inclined to believe that Morgana died and was replaced by someone else. Or got her mind swapped or something. If I was to say, like, which ones followed the source material and the myths of Arthur and Merlin better, it's like, they're about equal. They both change things and do different things. It's like Camelot is a lot more trying to be realistic, but having just that hint of magic, but it's more realistic fighting, more realistic politics, rules, things of that nature. But it also doesn't have a lot of the side characters that we know about. And in Merlin, it's like you got different origins for some of them, but the characters are right, and you get to meet Sir Lancelot and Sir Percival and Sir Gwyn, and you even get to meet Mordred, which is a good and a bad thing. It's like, so Mordred is one of those things that Merlin did where I'm not 100% sure I'm happy with the way they chose to do this, because basically Mordred showed up as a child, and he was a druid who did not speak, and Merlin wanted to protect him, wanted to get him to safety, and he went to the dragon for advice, which he did almost every episode. And the dragon's like, Mordred will grow up to kill Arthur. Don't help him. Let Uther kill him. Do not help this child. And Merlin's like, all right, I'll stand aside and let things go the way they're supposed to. And then helps Mordred escape. And it's like, okay, I can see you doing that for a child, and you're hoping that maybe you can change him. But then later on, you run into Mordred again. And the dragon says basically the same thing, and Merlin still helps him, and Mordred gets away. You get to the final season, and Mordred is there, and he becomes a knight of Camelot. He becomes one of the knights of Camelot, and he really likes Arthur and really wants to do good by him. And he has a druid friend who is in trouble, and he's going to get executed by Arthur because he's still enforcing the things that his father enforced, which is the anti-magic. And Mordred is begging Arthur to let the person he loves go. And Arthur says no, and he goes to Merlin, and he's like, I know we've never we've always been at odds a little bit, but I need your help to help save her. And this is the one time Merlin does not help him. And the girl dies, and then Mordred joins up with Morgana, and then they try to kill King Arthur. It's that thing of like, he just actively chooses things that don't necessarily help him, Merlin. There's a bunch of choices throughout the series where it's like, okay, I can either do this really dumb thing, or I can tell this one person who's worth trusting that I have magic and they'll help me and we won't have to deal with all the dumb things that will happen. And then he will choose the dumb thing because they have to keep the secret identity thing going for the entire series. Ugh. I'm sorry, this series, Merlin, ruined secret identities for me. But it's like, then you also get some interesting stuff. Like, I really liked they did, in Merlin, they did Sir Lancelot, and he appeared in the first season. And he was a commoner who wanted to be a knight, but not commoners could not become knights. And he met and fell in love with Guinevere right away. And that was actually interesting because he and Guinevere met and they were a couple before Guinevere and Arthur. So they had a relationship to start with. And then later on, when her and Arthur start to get together, Lancelot dies, and he dies as a hero. And then Morgana brings him back and uses him to try to corrupt the kingdom and separate Arthur and Guinevere. So them both getting together while she is with Arthur is now given a magical reason, and it gets a bit more forgiving versus, being as flippant and that as she was in Camelot. Yeah, I mean, it's a really good character, and it's really interesting, and you get some really interesting stories, you get some really good creatures. So overall, I enjoyed both series. They both have the advantages and the disadvantages. I would definitely say I'd recommend Merlin more than Camelot. Camelot is only 10 episodes, though. Has some really good action scenes, so it's worth, taking a weekend and watching it, because it's got some stuff in there that's actually pretty good. Merlin, on the other hand, is 5 seasons, and it gets a bit repetitive. I would not recommend binge watching Merlin, because it gets really repetitive pretty quickly. And definitely, if you start to feel like an episode is skip it and go to the next one. But there's still a lot of good stuff in there, a lot of good magic, a lot of good character stuff. Like, overall, I enjoyed the series a lot. It still has a few flaws for me, and a lot of that is just me remembering the fact that it took so long to get going, get to certain things. But I enjoyed it overall. So those were my thoughts on Merlin and Camelot. What did you all think? Did you like one of these series? Have you seen either of them? Is there things that I didn't talk about that you'd like to hear about? Or like go into more detail? What did you all think? And just, is there other, more King Arthur based shows that you'd like me to talk about? I kind of liked doing this. I liked comparing these two, and I have another one that I'm considering doing that I would love to hear if you all are interested in, or if you want me to talk about any other shows that I'm watching, I could do. The two that I am considering comparing is the Highlander and The Crow, because they're actually kind of similar. Like, they both have a really good first film, some really bad sequels, but a really great television show, too. So, yeah, let me know what you're all thinking. Is there some of these shows that you have thoughts on? Is there stuff you'd like me to review or anything? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. I will be trying to upload a video a month, at least, for the foreseeable future. And if I get more ideas, I'll upload more. But we'll see about that. That's all for today. Bye, everyone. Have a good day.